It's time for a U.S. Space Force Academy. I've been thinking that for a while myself, and now, an article out of Task and Purpose, two West Point grads think it's time for a military academy for cyber, space, and robotics. Elon Musk calls the idea Starfleet Academy, as two former Army officers think a new academy should bring elite, high-tech focused high school students together close to the brainpower of Silicon Valley. I completely agree. I completely agree. I've thought so now privately for a while now that it's time we have a Space Force Academy. And these two officers agree. And they've recently both been in Israel and Ukraine, and they've seen the adaptability of the younger mindset when it comes to combat. We're going to go a little bit into this article. It's a very long piece. I'm going to make sure that it's in the description. But I want to go through it with you here briefly. Something that Devon and I have witnessed firsthand at the front lines in Ukraine and Israel is much younger men and women are becoming generals. They're becoming colonels, Laval said. We have no education path or training path to create 30 or 40-year-old generals in the United States. A general in the cyber force or robotics force may end up being much younger than a general in conventional forces today. And age has nothing to do with merit. If you're qualified for your field and in your service, that's what you are, that's what you are. They even pitched a home for the campus, which they call Frontier Academy, just down the road from Silicon Valley at the Presidio, a former Army post at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. If that location sounds familiar, and you're a sci-fi fan, it might be because the Presidio was home of Starfleet Academy in the 1990s Star Trek movies, a connection that caught the eye of Elon Musk. The SpaceX founder called the tech-focused military academy a cool idea, adding that Starfleet Academy has a nice ring to it. And it does have a nice ring to it, although it would be called Space Force Academy. But the idea that these gentlemen have is really quite good and is based on an Israeli model. And that Israeli model, well, it's going to go into it in this article, so let's do that a little bit. For example, they can go into the reserves. A student can graduate into Space Force and maybe work 1 weekend a month or 2 weeks a year in their Space Force unit, and they might be working at SpaceX or Rocket Labs, Val said. Either they'll find a problem in their unit, maybe they'll have the opportunity to learn something in their private sector company and bring them to each other and bridge the private and public sector gap. Bridging the gap between those two is incredibly important because the military bureaucracy doesn't allow much to happen. And in this story, they talk about that specifically. How young soldiers on the front line find solutions to problems that never get solved because the bureaucracy above it never allows it to happen. And it seems that bureaucracy is one of the biggest issues that we have right now. It really does. Because, wow. You can see what's happening with the house clearing, as I've begun calling it. The issues that they found there. The most recent large-scale change occurred when President Trump established an entirely new military branch in 2018, the U.S. Space Force. But changemakers want more. Congress has called for the setting up of a drone corps, for instance. I am not for a drone corps. We don't need to set up a different branch of military for every single innovation that comes along on the battlefield. That it's a good way of creating more bureaucracy is what that is. However, when you have an entirely new domain of warfare, like space, that requires its own force. And it also requires minds thinking in that domain. Minds thinking in cyber, robotics, space, in multiple dimensions. On Earth, air, land, sea, under the sea. The high ground is space. And it's in multiple dimensions. And you've got to have the most brilliant people in the country thinking about that. To identify a pipeline of students who would be interested in the Frontier Academy, Laval and Shannon brainstormed an idea of federal high schools modeled on the way Israel recruits high schoolers for Unit 8200, its highly classified intelligence corps. Israel gathers the most brilliant youth in the nation between the ages of 17 and 21, and they consolidate them into one unit. And then they set them free to innovate and think. That is something America doesn't do, Laval said. They, Israel, find these kids when they're 12, 13 years old, and every student in the nation aspires to make it into Unit 8200 and have no channel for your youth. We have no channel for our youth in the same manner. There are, of course, fundamental differences between the United States and Israel, which has a population of 10 million, roughly 3% the size of the United States, in mandatory military service. Shannon said there's a lot of interest among bright, young people to attend top schools like Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Caltech, but the U.S. military is missing out on absorbing the talent that chooses to go into these schools over the military. What's extremely important about Frontier Academy concept is being an inspirational avenue to bring together some of the most brilliant people from the robotics competitions around the United States, the math elites, and things like that, in a way that they're not being addressed right now, Shannon said. And they're not being addressed right now. Pardon me. We don't really have a academy or repository of people like what he's describing here. You can call some of the universities that, but universities are failed academies and indoctrination centers that are not in any way looking to innovate in a way that betters us as a society. The Air Force Academy produces great pilots and people that support pilots. West Point creates great ground fighters, and Naval Academy creates people who understand the nautical domain, Shannon said. We don't have that right now in cyber and space domain, and we definitely don't understand how robotics and computer programming works all that together. And that's why we need an academy of people who do understand these things. And it does have to be based in a place where the people who understand that are going to be. How do you do that? Well, his model of a reserve force is, I think, the way to go. In that you go to school, you go to the academy, you're in the service, you either spend a very short time in active duty and then reserve service, or you just go right out to reserve service. Always the ability to be called up, always going in for your 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, but being able to work with people in the same sphere, being able to better the entire nation by working together in an academy that promotes innovation and promotes the idea of critical thinking. It promotes the idea of thinking outside the box, which is the way the tech industry works. So to West Point grads, think it's time for a military academy for cyber, space, and robotics. Elon Musk calls it Starfleet Academy. I call it Space Force Academy. The Presidio is a perfect place for it. I think it's time. Time for another U.S. military academy. The U.S. Space Force Academy at the Presidio. It sounds pretty good. I hope you liked the story. If you did, hit the like, and share it with a friend, and maybe subscribe. I do appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time.